Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar launch of the Healthier Product Reformulation Report in the Philippines. In today's session, we will be sharing some of the key insights from the report that highlights the food industry's progress and priorities on reformulation, consumer attitudes towards healthy eating, on healthy eating in general, and also on reformulated products in the Philippines. This webinar session will last about 45 minutes, and there'll be some time for Q&A at the end of the session. The summary report on the Philippines will be circulated to participants of the webinar following the session. We will also make it available on the Food Industry Asia's website together with the other country reports. Before we get started, I would actually like to make some quick introductions. I'm Sabira Ali. I'm the Public Affairs Manager at Food Industry Asia, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Kalissa Lim, who is the Regional Policy Analyst, and we'll be taking you through today's presentation. Next slide, please. So in this webinar, we'll be taking you through the research objectives and methodology of the study, consumer attitudes towards healthier product reformulation, industry's progress, some conclusions and recommendations from the study before we open up the floor for questions. Just a reminder though, please use the chat box to raise your questions at any time, and we'll be addressing those questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Next, please. So between 2018 and 2020, FIA together with IGD, a research organization that's based out in the UK, studied the reformulation trends across several markets in Asia, including Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, India, and Indonesia, to understand the extent of reformulation undertaken by industry, how consumers actually feel about it, about the use of alternative ingredients to make a product healthier, alongside the support that the industry was seeking in order to accelerate such efforts. This study was actually modeled after a research that was conducted in the UK to understand the reformulation trends and landscape in the UK when a fiscal policy on sugary beverages was first considered. So beyond the 5 markets that we've covered in Asia, we also carried out a similar study in China with the support of the China Food Information Center using a slightly different methodology. And given the pressures around the possible introduction of stringent policies as part of tackling the growing prevalence of obesity and NCDs, FIA also felt that it was timely for us to understand the reformulation landscape in the Philippines as well. So because reformulation efforts take place behind closed doors, these findings would actually present a valuable tool for companies, serving as a benchmark, and also for governments to assess progress. Next. The research actually comprised of 2 key components: an industry survey study and a consumer survey. Using a purposive sampling method, the industry survey was circulated to food and drink manufacturing companies and retailers operating out of the Philippines. Through this, we actually collected 30 responses, and the companies were then invited for an in-depth interview so that we could actually gather additional insights on the company's reformulation journeys. 8 of the companies shared their views, and these companies covered a broad range of product categories, including confectionery, sweet and savory snacks, cereals, ready-to-eat meals, non-alcoholic beverages, so on and so forth. The industry survey findings should be seen as indicative because the sample may not be fully representative of all the food companies in the Philippines. For the consumer part of the research, the survey was actually conducted based on a nationally representative sample of adults aged 18 and up living in the Philippines. So we collected around about just over 1,000 plus surveys, which were then analyzed for this study. Next, please. So the Philippines is actually challenged by a triple burden of malnutrition that includes undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, overweight, and obesity. Approximately 30% of the children under the age of 5 are stunted, and also close to 6%, 5.6 to be exact, of the children in the Philippines are wasted. While the economic growth in the Philippines is also changing the dietary habits of the consumer and the food environments, even in the rural and remote areas, we do see that more and more Filipino children and their families are becoming overweight or obese. 12% of the Filipino adolescents are overweight, and over a third of the adult population is actually overweight or obese. Additionally, 7% of the population also suffers from diabetes. Next, please. So the study actually found that health consciousness is quite high amongst Filipino consumers, with 8 in 10 of them indicating that it's up to them to follow a healthy diet. Consumers aged between 45 and 54 actually claim to be the most health conscious amongst other age groups, and as you can see, 86% of them felt this way. Next. Nearly all of the consumers, 99% of them, show some kind of interest or attempt towards healthy eating. And in fact, over half of the consumers actually claim that they mostly eat a healthy diet, with 32% claiming that they do so always. We then asked consumers about their motivations on eating healthier, and about 5 in 10 highlighted that although their diet is not as healthy, it's good enough for them. And this was actually more significant amongst the female population and those aged 55 and above. 4 in 10 also admitted that they often buy themselves less healthy products just to treat themselves, and those aged between 18 and 24 years were most likely to do this. This actually illustrates why it's important for food companies to make the products that's available to the consumers healthier and more easily accessible. Next. The cost of eating healthy food is also a concern for many. 57% perceive that healthier foods are more expensive than less healthy options. This is actually particularly higher amongst those that are aged between 25 and 34. Around about two-thirds of them felt this way. Additionally, those who attempt to eat healthily but fail to do so could also be put off by the higher prices of healthy food. Over a third, or 38% of all consumers, think that there aren't enough special offers on such products. In fact, almost 50% of those who actually attempt to eat healthily think that there aren't enough special offers on healthy food. Next. We then ask consumers about, what they feel about the type of advice that's available to them and the level of trust that they have on food companies. Almost half, or 48% of the consumers, do not feel confident about the nutritional advice that's made available to them across various outlets because they feel that it's inconsistent. This actually presents a challenge for consumers across all age groups and genders. This also highlights to us why consumer education is really, really important, as this would then enable, from a consumer perspective, to identify credible sources of information that will then influence their decisions pertaining to diet and health. Consumer trust on food companies were also relatively low. Only about half, or 49% of the consumers in the Philippines, trust food companies to provide all the products that they require to follow a healthy and balanced diet. We also found that consumers between the ages of 35 and 44 were most likely to trust food companies, while those in other age groups were less likely to do so. Next, please. Nutrition actually plays a particularly important role as to how a Filipino consumer actually chooses their products. The clear display of nutrition information, the addition of ingredients to make a product healthier, and recognizing all the ingredients that is in the product feature in the top 3 drivers of product choice. Next, please. About 9 in 10 consumers also claim to look at nutrition information to inform their purchase decisions. Compared to all the other countries that we carried out this survey in, Filipino consumers were the most likely to look out for nutrition information labels found on the back of packs. And this was at about 91%, as you can see from this slide, compared to a 68% average across all the other surveyed markets. While the majority of the consumers refer to nutrition information, the nutrition information label or the panel, about a quarter actually seek advice from the GDA monochrome label, and the same number also look out for the GDA energy label that is found on the front of packs. Filipino consumers who claim to eat healthily all the time were also more likely to read all types of labels to inform their purchase decisions. Next, please. We also ask consumers about the type of nutrients that they look out for when making a purchase. Consumers tend to look out for the amount of vitamins and minerals present in a product, the amount of sugar on nutrition labels. The amount of vitamins and minerals in a product was identified as a top priority for younger Filipino consumers aged 13 to 34, whereas the middle-aged population between the ages of 35 and 54 tend to focus more around the amount of sugar, salt, and calories that were present in a product. Older consumers beyond the age of 55 years were more cautious about the amount of fats and fiber that was present in the products that they purchased. Next, please. There are also many different ways in which Filipino consumers seek to improve their diets. Eating more fruits and vegetables was of the most popular choice, followed by reducing the intake of salt, sugar, and fat. Around a third of the consumers also try to avoid processed foods or ready meals, and over a quarter of these consumers were keen to maintain a balanced diet. This data set, this slide actually presents a wide range of opportunity from a food industry perspective to deliver for the consumers across various fronts. Next slide, please. And when we look at this, look at the areas to improve diets in terms of gender, we see that female consumers claim that they are more likely to focus on reducing the amount of sugary drinks that they include in their diets, processed foods, artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives that's in their products. These can be seen from the black bars on the slide. Male consumers, on the other hand, say that they were more interested in increasing their intake of fiber and the amount of protein that they consume. About 1 in 4 men also said that they were trying to drink lesser alcohol. When we asked both the consumers about the number of times that they were to dine out, female consumers also highlighted that they would like to reduce the number of times that they were to do so that they could maintain a healthy diet. Next, please. While we actually, from the last two slides, we see what are the areas that consumers want to focus on in order to improve their diets. We then took a look at which age groups looked into various areas to improve their diet. We found that the younger consumers were more likely to eat a balanced diet. They wanted to focus on the protein consumption, reduce snacking, and reduce carbohydrates. The middle-aged consumers between the ages of 35 to 54 were more inclined to reduce the amount of sugar, reduce the amount of artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives found in the product, the amount of fat from their diets, while also working to increase their fiber intake. And older consumers were more focused on consuming lesser fat, salts, and were more likely to drink a lot less alcohol in consideration to maintain good health. Next, please. A majority of the consumers in the Philippines believe that food companies should be changing their product formulations and recipes in order to help consumers make healthier choices. About 8 in 10, or as you see here, 84% of the consumers would be very happy if the product recipes would change to become healthier, provided that they still remain as tasty. With taste being one of the top considerations for consumers to choose food products, this is very important for manufacturers when it comes to improving the nutritional quality of the products without compromising the existing taste and flavor profiles so that you don't disaffect the consumer. Next, please. With regards to various reformulation approaches that food manufacturers follow, more than 80% of the consumers were generally receptive towards the fortification of vitamins and minerals in the products. This also comes in line with the type of nutrition information that consumers in the Philippines seek out for to help inform their purchase decisions. Almost 8 in 10 consumers are also happy for trans fats in the products to be removed. This is definitely in line with the Philippine government's goal to eliminate all trans fats in products by 2023. Almost 3/4 are receptive towards the use of alternative ingredients such as salt and sodium alternatives, sugar alternatives, including low non-caloric sweeteners to make a product healthier. And based on this data alone, we can see that consumers are very willing to consume reformulated products improve nutrition, so long as the taste profiles are well maintained. Next, please. So now we'll take a look at the reformulation landscape from an industry perspective. I'll pass the time over to Kalissa to share some of the data around this.
Okay, thank you, Severa. So as mentioned earlier, as part of the study methodology, we collected a total of 30 responses, with 8 of these companies being interviewed to provide an in-depth understanding of their reformulation journey. And of the food and beverage companies that responded to the survey, about 70% were MNCs and 30% were SMEs operating in the Philippines. So a majority of the sample were from manufacturing companies, while 7% were retailers. And about 60% make products for both the domestic and export markets, while 40% actually only cater to the domestic market alone. And most of these companies actually produce products under their own brand or business names. So the survey respondents also came from a wide range of disciplines, and half of these were from the technical, quality, regulatory, or nutrition roles, 17% from R&D, 13% from general management, and the rest from other functions. So this actually gives us a good range of different perspectives. So next slide. So the research include a range of companies that covered various product categories. So these range from beverages to sauces and condiments, the dairy products, cereals, snacks, confectionaries, and so on. So a majority, about 83% of the surveyed companies actually display nutrition labels in the form of GDA Energy, GDA Monochrome, and also a nutrition information panel across some, if not all of their products to facilitate consumer purchases. And the GDA label showing the energy value on the front of pack was the most commonly adopted front of pack labeling scheme, and it's used by 41% of the respondents. So through this study carried out in the Philippines, we were able to identify that about 23% of companies had plans to implement its reformulation efforts, while about 70% of the surveyed companies had already kickstarted their efforts with more plans in the pipeline. So 3% indicated that all of its reformulation plans have been completed, while a marginal 3% also noted that it had no plans to get started on reformulating its product portfolio. So many reasons were actually cited and mentioned in the study as a key driver for reformulation. So meeting consumer demand and improving public health were described as the top 2 motivators to reformulate, with responding to government regulation coming in third. So more importantly, it is the combination of all these drivers that make the case for reformulation so compelling. And with so many companies working on these, as we've seen on the previous slide, so for those that are not, they are in danger of being left behind. So when we asked the respondents about their attitudes towards reformulation, we found that there were actually few attitudinal barriers to change amongst the sample. So about 2/3 or 66% of the sample actually agreed that their products are suitable for reformulation. And a majority, about 87% of the sample, also believed that they were big enough to make a meaningful impact on health. So meanwhile, only 7% suggested that their perceived small size was an issue for reformulation. But the majority, also 63%, felt that consumers were seeking healthier products and believed that the industry had a role to play in driving consumer choices by providing healthier products as well. So on the other hand, only 17% felt that diets were a matter of consumer choice and that companies should not interfere by changing product recipes. So industry priorities on reformulation has been shifting with evolving consumer trends over the years. So when we look at the reformulation priorities 5 years ago, so we can see in the purple line, so reducing or removing trans fat, saturated fat, and energy was seen as the key priorities. So while work still continues in these areas, the industry is also focusing its efforts on areas whereby there is a growing public interest. So this is particularly apparent in the areas of increasing whole grain, fiber, proteins, and reducing sugar and salt in its products. So as you can see from the slide, we marked it with an asterisk. So this is linked to the growing prevalence of obesity and diabetes in Asia and also in the Philippines. And the increased focus on fiber actually comes with growing consumer awareness on its benefit to health. And in terms of enabling the development for healthier products, companies have been using a variety of techniques to support their reformulation program. And the most popular approaches are making a variety of changes to a recipe simultaneously, fortifying products with additional ingredients, or applying a new technology that can help support reformulation. And we then asked the surveyed companies, on the barriers to reformulation. So sampled companies identified that maintaining taste, budget limitation, and the lack of technical knowledge were the top three key challenges. And while these challenges actually vary by nutrient, the main challenges were on sugar and fat reduction. So this is in particularly with regards to maintaining taste, texture, or other technical functions. So for fortified foods and beverages, as we know, feature highly on the consumer health agenda. However, the challenges that is linked to such fortification are also associated with limited budget alongside maintaining taste. So sometimes reformulation can be relatively simple, but in other cases, even small changes can make a drastic difference to the taste, the texture, the aroma, or the appearance of a product. And this is where technical expertise and consumer testing are essential to ensure a successful reformulation case for the Philippine food industry. And as part of the research, we also asked companies if they will sign on to the voluntary marketing pledge in the Philippines. And of the surveyed candidates, a majority, about 70%, they endorsed the voluntary commitment by either being committed to the pledge or having plans to join the pledge. So this is a strong indication of the industry striving to market its product responsibly to its consumer. And the notion of self-regulation, while working towards expanding the range of healthier product offerings to its consumer through innovation and reformulation, actually shows how the industry is actually working towards the delivery of better nutrient and also to tackle the growing prevalence of malnutrition in the Philippines. And we also asked the sample size, what could actually help accelerate R&D efforts in the Philippines. And a majority, so about 94%, they said that they'll be more willing to do so if the government offered financial or fiscal incentive. Currently, less than a quarter, so about 21% of the industry sample conduct all of their R&D outside of the Philippines, while about 42% conducted all of their R&D locally. Additionally, about more than three quarters, about 80%, next slide. So about three quarters, 80% of the company sample highlighted that with more awareness on the changing public health priorities and also the current national nutrition targets, this can and could help the industry to better plan its product reformulation activities. So the sample also noted that more technical knowledge and also more consumer testing were identified, whereby support is required to enhance such reformulation efforts, while about 37% of the sample felt that it is also important to improve internal communication within the respective businesses, being essential to accelerate such R&D efforts. And returning to the consumer perceptions on whether or not product categories have become healthier or unhealthier in the last 5 years, we found that Philippine consumers felt that dietary products at 67%, cereals at 62%, and dried fruits and nuts at 51%. So we can see at the top three in the gray bars, they have become healthier during the past 5 years. And over half actually felt that products such as ready to eat meals, confectionery, and savory snacks had become less healthy in the span of the last 5 years as well. Um, so the recognition of such reformulation activities in other categories is fairly low, so there were not much changes being observed. So for products that had not been noticeably becoming healthier to consumers, so the top three that we listed above, ready-to-eat meals, confectionaries, and savory foods, so these may be perceived as becoming less healthy, even if in reality they may have stayed the same or improved. So from a marketing standpoint, it would be relevant for the industry to promote the changes that they are making to a product to update consumers' views on product categories that have undergone a substantial amount of reformulation activity. So next slide. Based on the findings that we have shared with you throughout the whole presentation, it is clear that Philippine consumers are health conscious and are willing to improve their diets. But with the support from food manufacturers to deliver healthier alternatives to meet their dietary goals. However, we still know that cost is a significant barrier for consumers to purchase healthier products as well. And they often use clear display of nutrition information as a key driver to facilitate their food purchases. And from the industry perspective, a majority of food companies have kickstarted their reformulation efforts, and more companies would also carry out R&D efforts to drive such reformulation if the government actually offered a fiscal incentive. And given that consumer also prioritize taste, food manufacturer that we see in the sample, they tend to lean towards making a variety of changes to avoid consumer dissatisfaction. Next slide. So with the prevailing undernutrition and obesity issues in the country, we know that food companies in the Philippines have been working on various solutions to deliver products with improved nutrition quality to its consumers. And with a bit of support within the industry, by sharing the technical know-hows and also, getting incentive from the government, businesses can further accelerate their efforts to deliver nutritious and tasty products to its consumers. And at the same time, FIA feel that collaboration across stakeholders is highly necessary to facilitate the communication of public health priorities to both the industry as well as the consumer to enable them to make informed purchase decision. So this can ensure that consumer receive consistent information such as a unified and clear nutritional advice on dietary intakes. And with businesses, providing increased communication around the benefits of reformulated products, this can also help to present to the consumer and also help them to identify healthier products and facilitate informed food choices.